Now we want to tell you about John's journey. This tale comes from Texland. 10 years after John's departure, 3 ships arrived at Flymere. The people cheered, and the mother had their stories recorded. When John reached the Mediterranean Sea, news of the Golan had preceded him. He found no safety in the nearby region, Italy. Hence, he crossed over to Lyda's land, Libya, with his fleet. There, the black people wanted to capture and eat him. Eventually, they reached Thyrus, but Minerva warned that the air there had long been tainted by the priests. The king was a descendant of Tunis, which was later discovered. However, the priests desired a king they deemed very old, so they elevated Tunis to a god, much to the annoyance of his followers. After leaving Thyrus, the Therians raided a ship from their rear. It was too far to retrieve, but John swore revenge. As night fell, John sent his ship towards the distant Krekelanden. Eventually, they reached a barren-looking land with a harbor. Minerva believed it to be a safe place because princes and priests were unwelcome due to the rich clay soil they didn't appreciate. However, upon reaching the harbor, it was too small for all the ships, and most were too weak to continue. John, desiring to press on, called upon his young crew to follow him with spear and banner. Minerva wished to stay and did the same with her group. Most joined Minerva, but the young sailors chose John. John took Calta's lamp and her girls, Minerva kept her own lamp and girls. Between the distant and nearby Krekelanden, John found some islands that seemed suitable to him. On the largest island, he began building a fort among the mountains. From the small islands, he plundered Therian ships and lands out of revenge. Hence, those islands were named both the Robber Islands and the Jonic Islands. When Minerva observed the land called Attica by its inhabitants, she saw that the people were all goat herders. They sustained themselves with meat, wild roots, herbs, and honey. They wore animal hides and lived on the mountainsides. Therefore, our people called them Hillingus. Initially, they ran away, but when they saw we were not interested in their possessions, they returned and showed great friendship. Minerva asked if they could stay in peace, which was allowed on the condition that they would aid in battles against their neighbors, who abducted their children and plundered their possessions. Then, they built a fort 1.5 poles from the harbor. At Minerva's suggestion, the fort was named Athens, as she wanted future generations to know they were received there as friends, not through deceit or violence. While they worked on the fort, the chiefs came to see. When they saw we had no slaves, it displeased them. They conveyed this to Minerva, assuming she was a queen. But Minerva inquired how they had acquired their slaves. They replied that some were bought, others were spoils from battles. Minerva stated that if no one bought slaves, no one would abduct their children, and there would be no war. If they wanted to remain our allies, they had to free their slaves. The chiefs refused, wanting to drive us away. However, the bravest among them assisted in building our fort, which we are now constructing with stone. That is the tale of John and Minerva. After recounting this, they asked for iron weapons for the fort as their enemies were powerful. If Minerva agreed, the people asked if the customs of the friars would flourish in Athens and the other Krekelanden. The mother replied that if the distant Krekelanden belonged to friars' heritage, they would flourish there. But if not, there would be a long struggle, for the people of Findas would be oppressed by Croda for another 5,000 years before they were ready for freedom. This concerns the Geatmen. After Helenia or Minerva died, the priests pretended to be on our side. To emphasize this, they declared Helenia a goddess. They refused to choose another mother, claiming they feared among her virgins, there would be no one they could trust as much as Minerva, also called Nyalenia. However, we did not wish to acknowledge Minerva as a goddess, as she herself had said that no one could be good or perfect except the spirit of Rulda. Therefore, we chose Geirpaya's daughter as our mother. When the priests saw they could not exert influence over us, they left Athens and told others that we did not want to recognize Minerva as a goddess out of envy because she had shown so much love to the inhabitants. They gave the people images resembling her and claimed that they could ask anything of those images as long as they remained obedient. This caused the ignorant people to develop a dislike for us, and eventually, they attacked us. But we had bent our stone wall with 2 horns to reach the sea. This prevented them from reaching us. Then came an Egyptian named Cecrops, a high priest with keen eyes, a clear mind, and an enlightened spirit, to offer advice. Seeing he could not storm our wall, he sent messengers to Thyrus. Unexpectedly, 300 ships full of soldiers from the wild mountain tribes arrived at our harbor while we were fighting on the wall. Once they had taken the harbor, the fierce soldiers wanted to plunder our village and our ships. A soldier even assaulted a girl, but Cecrops did not allow it. The Therian sailors, who still had friar's blood, said they would hoist the red rooster in their ships if that happened, and they would never see their mountains again. Cecrops, disliking murder or destruction, sent messengers to Gyut and demanded that she surrender the wall. She could leave freely with all her possessions, and so could her followers. The wisest of the leaders, seeing they could not hold the wall, advised Gyut to concede quickly before Cecrops grew angry. 3 months later, Gyut departed with the best sons of Phrygia and 7 times 12 ships. Once outside the harbor, 30 ships from Thyrus arrived, carrying women and children. They wanted to go to Athens, but upon hearing what was happening there, they went with Gyut. The king of Thyrus, seeing his best sailors had departed, sent all his ships with soldiers to capture them dead or alive. But when they reached the strait, both the earth and the sea trembled. The earth rose so high that all the water drained from the strait, and all the mudflats and salt marshes rose up like a wall before them. This happened because of the virtues of the Geatmen, as everyone can clearly see. In the year 1005 after the downfall of Atland, this was written on the eastern wall of Phryasburg. After 12 years without seeing any Creekerlanders in Alman land, 3 ships arrived, as splendid as we had never seen before. On the largest ship was a king from the Jonic Islands named Ulysses, renowned for his wisdom. A priestess had foretold to him that he would become king over all Creekerlanders if he could obtain the lamp that burned at the lamp of Texland. To acquire this lamp, he brought many treasures, especially jewels from Troy, a city the Creekerlanders had conquered. He offered all these treasures to the mother, but she refused. When he saw she was not to be won over, he went to Walhalagara. There he met a burged maiden named Cart, also called Calip because of her outstanding lower lip. He stayed with her, according to the maidens, and eventually obtained a lamp from her. But this lamp did not benefit him, for his ship sank when he set out to sea, and he was picked up naked and exposed by other ships. A writer of pure Phrygia's blood remained from this king, born in the new harbor of Athens. He wrote about Athens, allowing us to understand how true Mother Helix spoke when she said that the customs of Phrygia would not endure in Athens. You've likely heard many negative things about Cecrops from the other Creekerlanders because he didn't have a good reputation. But I dare say he was an enlightened man, highly praised both by the inhabitants and by us. He didn't oppress the people like other priests but was virtuous and valued the wisdom of distant peoples. Therefore, because he understood that, he allowed us to live according to our own Asegabuk. The story went that he favored us because he was born of a Frisian girl and an Egyptian priest, because of his blue eyes, and because many girls among us were abducted and sold to Egypt. But he never confirmed this himself. What is certain is that he showed us more friendship than all the other priests combined. But after he died, his successors quickly began violating our laws and made so many unsuitable rules that eventually, nothing remained of equality and freedom except mere semblance and name. They wouldn't allow our precepts to be put on paper, thus hiding their knowledge from us. Initially, all matters in Athens were handled in our language, but later it had to be in both languages and ultimately only in the native tongue. In the early years, the male folk of Athens only married women of our own kind, but later, even the young men raised with the girls of the land associated with them. The children born from this were the most beautiful and smartest in the world, but also the worst. They hovered between both sides and didn't care about laws or traditions except when it suited them. As long as there was a glimpse of Friar's spirit, all building materials were used for communal works, and no one was allowed to build a house larger or richer than that of their neighbor. But when some of the pampered city folk became wealthy from our seafaring and the silver obtained by slaves from the Silverlands, they started living outside the city on the slopes or in the valleys. There, they built palaces with precious belongings behind high walls of foliage or stone. To curry favor with the corrupt priests, they placed false gods and lustful images in their palaces. Among these corrupt priests and rulers, sometimes the boys were more sought after than the girls, and often they were led astray from the path of virtue by lavish gifts or violence. Because wealth was valued above virtue and honor among this spoiled and degenerated people, sometimes you saw boys adorned in splendid white clothing, bringing shame upon their parents and the girls, mocking their gender. When our simple parents went to Athens to complain at the assembly, there were shouts, "Here, here, there speaks a sea monster." Athens was like a swamp in the hot lands full of leeches, toads, and venomous snakes, where no man with strict morals could set his foot. This is inscribed on all our boroughs. How are the marks, islands, were lost to us, 1,602 years after the sinking of Atland. Through the foolish arrogance of Woden, the Magi had become master over the eastern part of Skånland. They dared not come over the mountains and the sea. The mother did not want it back. She spoke and said, "I see no danger in his weapons, but in bringing back the Skånlanders, because they are degenerated and corrupted." At the General Assembly, they thought the same. Hence, they left it to him. About 100 years ago, the Danes started trading. They traded their iron weapons and tools for gold jewelry, copper, and iron ore. The mother sent messengers and advised them to stop this trade. She warned of the danger to their culture. If they lost their culture, they would also lose their freedom. But the Danes did not want to understand that they could lose their culture, therefore, they did not listen to her. Eventually, they jeopardized their own weapons and food. But this wrong choice brought them punishment. Their bodies were loaded with splendor and grandeur, but their storerooms and barns were empty. Exactly 100 years after the first ship carrying food left the coast, poverty and scarcity gained the upper hand, hunger spread its wings and stretched over the land, discord walked proudly through the streets and houses, love could find no sustenance, and unity disappeared. A child asked its mother for food, but she had nothing to offer except jewelry. Women went to their men, these went to the graves had nothing or kept it hidden. Now they had to sell the jewelry, but while the sailors were gone, the ruler laid a plank over the sea and the strait, the Sound. When the ruler finished the bridge, vigilance departed, and betrayal took its place. Instead of guarding the shores, they harnessed their horses to their sledges and rode to Skånland. But the Skånlanders, wanting to reclaim their land, came to the Marks Islands. On a clear night, they all came. They claimed they had rights to their land, and while they fought, the Finns went to the deserted villages and abducted the children. Due to their lack of good weapons and inexperience in battle, they lost and with that their freedom, for the Magi became master. That happened because they did not read Friar's text and ignored her advice. Some believe they were betrayed by the counts, and the maidens had known that for a long time. But as soon as someone spoke about it, they were silenced with golden chains. We cannot judge that, but we want to call out to you, do not trust too much in the wisdom and virtue of your rulers and maidens. If it endures, everyone must watch over their own passions and the common welfare. 2 years later, the Magi himself came with a fleet of light boats to steal the mother of Texland and the lamp. This wicked deed he performed at night, in winter, during stormy weather, while the wind howled and the hail rattled against the windows. The tower watchman, hearing something, lit his torch. When the light from the tower fell on the wall, he saw armed men. He wanted to ring the bell, but it was too late. Before the watch was ready, 2,000 men were already pounding on the gate. The battle was short because the soldiers had not kept a good watch, and all were lost. While everyone was busy fighting, an ugly Finn sneaked into the mother's sleeping quarters and intended her harm. the mother defended herself, causing him to fall backward against the wall. When he got up again, he stabbed her in the belly and said, "If you don't want my staff, then you'll get my sword." Behind him stood a sailor from the Marks Islands. He grabbed his sword and struck the Finn's head. Black blood flowed, and above it floated a blue flame. The Maggie had the mother taken care of on his ship. When she had recovered and could speak again, the Maggie said she had to sail with him but could keep her lamp and her maidens. He promised her a status higher than she had ever known. He ordered her in the presence of his dignitaries to confirm that he would become master over all the lands and peoples of Freya. He threatened her with much pain if she didn't confirm it. After he had gathered all his dignitaries around her bed, he asked aloud, "Frana, since you are clairvoyant, tell me, will I become master over all the lands and peoples of Freya?" At first, Frana seemed to ignore him. Eventually, she opened her mouth and said, "My eyes are darkened, but another light arises in my soul. Yes, I see it. Listen, Eartha, and rejoice with me." At the time Atlan sank, the first spoke of the Joel stood at the top. Later it fell down, taking our freedom with it. If it takes 2 spokes or even 2,000 years, sons will rise who have been conceived in disobedience by the rulers and priests and will testify against their fathers. They will all perish by murder, but what they proclaimed will endure and bear fruit in the hearts of courageous people, like good seeds sown in your womb. For 1,000 years, the spoke will continue to descend and fall deeper into darkness and blood due to the tricks of rulers and priests. Then, the dawn will begin to glow again. When that happens, the false rulers and priests will fight together against freedom. But freedom, love, and unity will protect the people and rise with the Joel from the filthy pool. The light that first only flickered will gradually become a flame. The blood of the wicked will flow over your body, but you must not absorb it. Ultimately, poisonous creatures will prey upon it and die. All the filthy stories fabricated to honor the rulers and priests will be sacrificed to the flame. From now on, all your children will live in peace. After she had spoken, she collapsed. But the Maggie, who had not understood her well, shouted, "I asked you if I would become master over all the lands and peoples of Freya, and now you speak to someone else." Frana rose again, looked straight at him, and said, "Before 7 days have passed, your soul will wander among the night birds by the graves, and your corpse will lie at the bottom of the sea." "Fine," said the Maggie with restrained anger, "say that I'm coming." Then he said to his servants, "Throw that woman overboard." Thus ended the last of the mothers. We do not call for revenge, time will take care of that. But 1,000 times, we call upon Freya, watch! 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 What happened next to the Maggie? After the mother was murdered, he had the lamp and the maidens brought to his ship, along with everything else he liked. Then he sailed to the Vly Lake because he wanted to steal the maiden of Medisblick or Stavrin and appoint her as mother. But they had been warned. The sailors of Stavrin and Aldurga would have welcomed him, but the great fleet was far away. They left and sailed with their small fleet to Medisblick and hid in the shelter of the trees. The Maggie approached Medisblick in daylight and sunshine. His men bravely stormed the fortress. But as soon as all the people had landed in boats, our sailors emerged from the creek and shot their arrows with burning turpentine balls at his fleet. They were so well aimed that many of his ships immediately caught fire. His men on the ships also shot at us but hit nothing. When eventually a burning ship drifted toward the Maggie's ship, he ordered his helmsman to keep a distance. But that helmsman was the Dane who had felled the Finn. He said, "You sent our honorable mother to the sea bottom to rot. You might have forgotten that in the bustle. Now I'll ensure you keep your word." The Maggie tried to fend him off, but the helmsman, a true Frisian and strong as an aurochs, grabbed his head with both hands and threw him overboard into the waves. Then he hoisted his brown shield and sailed straight toward our fleet. This allowed the maidens to reach us unharmed, but the lamp had gone out, and no one knew why. When they heard that the Maggie had drowned, they left because the sailors were mainly Danes. When the fleet was far enough, our sailors turned around and shot their fire arrows at the Finns. When the Finns saw that and realized they had been betrayed, there was chaos, and there was no obedience or command anymore. At that moment, the occupation left the fortress. Those who didn't flee were killed, and those who fled found their end in the pools of the Krylinger forest. Afterward, when the sailors lay in the creek, there was a mocker from Stavron among them who said, "Media will surely laugh when we rescue her from her fortress." Therefore, the maidens named that creek Midimelakia. The events that followed may be remembered by everyone. The maidens must tell them in their own way and describe them well. With this, we consider our task complete. Hail! End of the book.